Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending where you are in the world. A very warm welcome to our webinar. This webinar will be covering game development technology for education from GameMaker. And we're going to be looking at the different methods of teaching GameMaker at different stages as students progress through their education. Oh, sorry, there was a bit of a delay. So to the agenda, we'll start with a brief overview of GameMaker, and then we're going to look at the approaches to teaching game design. And this includes some feedback from teachers who took part in a survey we did back in November 2020, which I'll be showing a little bit later. And then we'll be looking at the different approaches taken for different students by different age groups. And for each age group, we will move on to some challenges that have been brought about, particularly by COVID, and how we adjusted for home learning. And then at the very end, we'll be covering some privacy and, importantly, the licensing support that we provide to all schools during this time. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end if you have some questions. So GameMaker, the perfect tool for teaching code and game design. Before we get to the educator resources, I'd like to provide a brief overview of GameMaker. So in March of this year, the software was renamed. So you may have seen it as GameMaker Studio 2 in the past, and now we're just called GameMaker. But no changes to the software were made. It was just a branding decision made by ourselves and on behalf of our parent company. GameMaker was first developed in 1999 for use in education. It's an easy to learn 2D game making tool. We have kind of two approaches within the tool to build games. One is a GML visual system, which is essentially like a no code option for anybody who's a little bit code describe it, but yeah, a little bit apprehensive in wanting to learn how to code. We do have a substitute for it, but also it's there so that it's a good way to understand some of the fundamental building blocks of the logic involved in game making and how you can then progress to coding when you're ready, should you want to take a slower approach. If not, or if then, we then have a custom language called GML Code, which is the GameMaker language code. It's very similar to JavaScript. It's based on C, and it's designed to be very easy to use for game design and to be simple to pick up. GameMaker includes a number of editors you can edit: images, sprites, objects, and runes. They've been updated quite extensively through the years. And we also recently introduced a sequences animation tool within the engine itself. And off the back of that, there's a lot of free resource out there, particularly educator-related resources out there to learn GameMaker. And we have a very large community, quite a noisy community at times, and across various social media channels, forums, etc. So, teaching game design. We sent out this, excuse me. So we sent out a questionnaire to our teachers at the start of November 2020, and we asked how effective are game design lessons at teaching the following, and we have these varying topics here. And you can see there was mostly a lot of positive results as reflected on the slide, and the responses are quite consistent with the answers we received to a previous survey back in 2019, which we asked a very similar question. And more than 75% of respondents rated the effectiveness of GameMaker at learning engagement, particularly with individual confidence and planning is somewhat effective or better. And that's the main, I guess, one of the main USPs of GameMaker. It's a very easy starting place to learn how to make games and also to apply some of the basic principles of game design. We often ask what age GameMaker is taught at, and as you can see from the graph, There is a range of ages, but today we're going to look at approaches from 3 age buckets: 12 to 14, 15 to 16, and 17 plus. Here's a graph showing how teachers approach the teaching of game design from a survey of educators who use GameMaker. As you can see, the teaching of GameMaker is very hands-on, so it suits kinesthetic learners. And this is probably why we hear that students who struggle to engage in other areas of the curriculum are more motivated to engage with GameMaker for their game design lessons. There are 3 approaches to teaching that I'm going to cover in this presentation. First, in blue, is make a game step-by-step using video. This is an approach that solely relies on video tutorials where users build and extend games, starting with no knowledge using GML Visual, and then progress into making these games using GML Code. I'd say this is more appropriate in home learning situations, maybe in out-of-school camps or clubs where there's no real formal framework needed for learning code. In orange, we have make a game step-by-step with the teacher leading. And in this approach, the educator provides guidance on the teaching of coding to fulfill the school curriculum. And this is reinforced with step-by-step tutorials. It comes with an assessment structure and homework, and this is an approach taken by our educator resource and will require the educator to run online tutorials to go through the slides. And finally, in green, we have the approach set a project with objectives for students to interpret. And this is generally the approach we see taken with those aged between 15 and 16. And this is actually the most popular approach and is used in more advanced curricula where students are required to show creativity and practical implementation of programming. So for this approach, I'll show you the resources that can provide guidance and some inspiration as well. This graph shows how teachers evaluate the progress being made by students. Our free tutorials include fully documented teacher and peer evaluation criteria. I'd say assessing progress can be quite a difficult part of home learning, but GameMaker enables easy sharing of games so educators can check on progress and make sure students are on the right track. In 2019, the study that we alluded to earlier, we got some great feedback from educators on how using game design has aided the education progress at the school. And here are just some excerpts that we got back. And I think to summarize these excerpts, it was mostly about how we can bring about something quite complex into very simple steps. And the fact that there is kind of like a persistence approach to using the tool to progress within the game design principles. But also we got some feedback from students as well. And these are some experts on what they enjoyed the most, and a very similar theme. And I think from a student perspective, it's the really more kind of the rewarding aspect of having an idea in your head and bring it about onto a digital canvas and in interactive form. And the fact that GameMaker is quite a relatively much more easier engine to use with respect to others out there in the market. There's a deep rewarding aspect to seeing their ideas take shape. Oh, sorry, I've skipped a slide, excuse me. So to look at some of the different styles of teaching at age 12 to 14, school curriculums within this age group are generally focused on teaching students the fundamentals of coding and giving them engaging ways to put those newly learned skills into practice. So to this end, we created Space Bubbles. And Space Bubbles is a GML visual project-based scheme of work where students work on one project over the course of 8 one-hour lessons. with 30 minutes being spent on learning code and 30 minutes being spent on making the Space Bubbles game. Over those lessons, students are taught how to program by recreating their own version of the game, Space Bubbles, using the video tutorials. It's aimed at children aged 12 to 14, but can be used at older and younger depending on their skill level. And it's a good place to start. It was developed by a guy called Terry Watts, who was a teacher and was formerly a game designer. And in a home learning environment, the lessons can be taught using Zoom, and the students can progress using the video tutorials. They're able to export their games, submit their game for evaluation by the teacher, and complete their self-assessment forms. Each lesson has its own starter project that contains everything it should be at the end of the previous lesson. So if a student gets stuck on a specific lesson, they won't fall behind as they can move on to the next one. Moving on to the 12 to 14 age bracket, the curriculum topics covered include programming key concepts and principles, sequencing, very important aspect of game development, selection statements and iteration, modeling the state and behavior of real-world problems and physical systems. So, for example, one of the homework exercises is to find the correct order of a set of listed steps in order to successfully make a hot chocolate. Which is quite fun. Moving on to home learning, particularly with video tutorials. This is Space Rocks, the first of our consumer tutorials, where students can learn on their own. And this game is based on the classic Asteroids game and was created for beginner level, with many of the same mechanics as Space Bubbles. It covers both GML Visual and GML Code, so you can make the game in either, or you can make the game in GML Visual and then remake it in GML Code to better understand how the logic translates. And this is an official tutorial made by one of our community educators, who goes by the name Friendly Cosmonaut. So it also helps to introduce a different teaching style and includes an intro to GameMaker itself. The focus of this is to retain engagement through quick wins. Within the first few minutes, your students will have created a ship and got it moving. Then they are just layering on additional game elements. Space Mods builds on Space Rocks. It also has GML Visual and GML Code versions. And this additional content can also support students who need more help with the Space Bubbles extension and challenge tasks. It contains an additional 12 videos, about just over 2 hours, and explains how to use and implement some important aspects of a typical game, including power-ups, enemy ships, cameras, parallax, the kind of layered backgrounds, which is quite commonplace in 2D side scrollers, visual effects and particles and screen shake moments, which are particularly useful to add a bit of oomph to certain aspects of the game. So there's a nice comment here from a user who felt that they were able to start making their own modifications to their games once they had completed some of the Space Mods videos. So just kind of testament to how successful this tutorial has been for people who have been learning GameMaker. Breakthrough is a brick breaker game. It's taught for both GML Visual and GML Code. So students have the opportunity to develop the game with either method. Around half of all projects being worked on in GameMaker are in GML Visual, so there's no need to rush to GML Code. You or your students can move on once you feel prepared to do so. This is a totally different style of game, but shares fundamental concepts with the tutorials I've mentioned in previous slides, and the teaching is still very much at beginner level. This is Fire Jump. It's one of our latest tutorials. It is a full game tutorial with GML Visual that introduces the basics of GameMaker to create your own infinite platformer game. So in this game, you have a kind of fireman character who's kind of tasked to continuously, endlessly jumping upwards in a vertical direction. It comes as a four-part series, a four-part tutorial series. And I do highly recommend to check it out after the webinar. It's a really nice, polished game, And you can click on the link on this slide for more information. Oh, excuse me. And on the side where there's a link to play the web version of the game as well. So moving on to the 15 to 16 age bracket. Here we see the school curriculum focusing more on the creative applications of coding with GameMaker. And with project-based tutorials, you can set a theme and see how your students interpret, and then judge it based on a market scheme. And the scheme could, for example, include the following: an interpretation of the theme, complexity or functionality, playability, coding practice, creativity. And what I've done on this slide is I've included some links to search to some resources for tools and artworks and audio that can be used as the basis for game creation. One of the nice things about game development is there's lots of free resources out there, including third-party tools, which you can plug in to your projects relatively easily. At the bottom on this list, there's a link to a global game jam. And this is particularly noteworthy since they run the world's largest game jam each year. And a lot of GameMaker developers utilize game jams as a way to either springboard existing ideas they have in their head, or to connect with other people in the industry, or just to generally put them on a little project to further learn the GameMaker toolset. And we get a lot of great game ideas out of those as well. We also have a lot of blog articles that can provide inspiration. They're mostly from our team and pro developers, and they can fit quite well in conjunction with some of the previous tutorials I mentioned, such as Space Bubbles and Space Rocks. And they all cover a wide variety of initiatives, from planning to creating game mechanics, how-tos, how to get a game finished. Any component of a game project will have a blog post to cover it. And yeah, this is just a continuation, really. So these are some YouTube tutorials. As you can see, there's no shortage of documentation and prescriptive guidance on GameMaker. And they're all covered. There's tutorials from beginner right up to advanced, and there's a lot of them on the YouTube platform. And what do I understand this slide? I think I just have a link here of the manual. So do make note of this. So this is essentially a documentation that we have with GameMaker. We have quite an extensive documentation on all aspects of the engine. It's heavily documented, and I highly recommend you to take a look at it. One of the problems with students age 15, 16 who are home learners is that group learning and projects can be more difficult to achieve. And to assist with this, we have official tools video tutorials that are accessible through our YouTube channel. And these can take you through all the tools and editors and demonstrating as they work. To the right of the slide, you have a list of some of the integrated tools which are integral to the engine, and we have tutorials that cover every aspect of these sets. If you're looking for a more expansive set of game tutorials, I would recommend this developer, who in this set of video tutorials will explain how to make a platformer game. It starts at a very beginner level using the GameMaker language. And we have a blog page that also links to the developer's YouTube page, where they explain a lot of the development concepts with some practical examples as well. This is Sean Spalding, very famous platform tutorial series on YouTube. A really lovely young man as well. I had a good conversation with him the other day. And he's currently building a really nice 2D side-scrolling game at the moment. So if you search for Sean Spalding on Twitter, you can have a look at that. He's sharing some some early insight into that. But he also has like a 27-part tutorial on his channel that essentially guides the user all the way from a starting blank project to having a very working basic platform game. And a game that includes a lot of effects and a menu system as well. So I highly recommend to check that out. So moving on to the 17+, we have a lot of new education materials that we released just last year. And this is more detailed GML code based game design tutorials for artists mostly, and people starting to learn game design aimed at college and university level. So in this series, you're guided on how to make a game called Little Town, an adventure playing game. It was created by university lecturer and game designer Ben Rivers. And Ben teaches game design for a faculty in Ontario. In fact, I think it's the Faculty of Design. I can't remember, but anyhow, these materials include a very detailed booklet and video tutorials which students can use to make the game in 8 one-hour lessons. And there are about 8 hours of video in total. We also provide an instructor guide, which is just over a 300-page PDF that has a set step-by-step tutorials and a guide on how to teach it and how to evaluate progress as well. Little Town utilizes more advanced functionality within GameMaker, which is important to highlight. It's very much an advanced component to the education pathway. It also includes, and this kind of wave diagram that is in front of me is the sequences animation function. But it's also worth noting that this is a relatively new feature in GameMaker, and all our existing licenses provide access to sequences as well. For older students aged 17+ or even 16+, they can use our community forums as a way to engage with our community. Our community is extremely helpful, very supportive, and usually assist with anybody that kind of surfaces a problem within the forum. It's a very forthcoming community. Lots of people come there to discuss ideas or have suggestions about their games. So I highly recommend for anybody within this age bracket to utilize the forum, since it's essentially a fountain of game making knowledge. With regards to licensing, we have 3 types of licensing available, and these can be purchased through StudiCo. First of all, there's the educated license, which provides access to desktop export, which is Windows, Mac, and Linux. The Educated Plus, which provides access to desktop and web exports. And the Achiever, which provides access to desktop, web, mobile, and now PlayStation 4. And there are 1 to 2 year options available. The seats are concurrent. They use licenses, so they can be used for multiple classes. GameMaker can be used on PC or a Mac. It's not on a Chromebook yet. We're working on that. And that's better. I mean, we're just coming off the back of COVID, so but it's still always worth highlighting, since we made a promise during COVID time that's set to expire in June. So as you can see from this slide, this shows the result of a survey we made in November 2020. At the time, only 5% of teachers were unaffected by COVID, thereabouts. So as a consequence, we provided support to our users throughout COVID, and currently and until the end of June 2022, so we've still got a month and 10 days, all seat licenses can be used by 5 students simultaneously. So 30 seats that would usually have been used in a computer lab can be used simultaneously by about 150 students learning at home. So hopefully we won't need to extend beyond June, but we will look at this nearer the time to see if measures need to be extended again. But hopefully we've seen the last of the COVID fiasco, so to speak. And lastly, privacy, something we take very seriously at GameMaker. So that how we set it up is like this. The teacher will act as a seat manager. They receive one perpetual educated desktop license that they can use to investigate GameMaker and understand the required setup of the software. And the seats are entirely anonymous. So the only information needed for a seat are a username, which you set, and also passwords. But no personally identifiable information is collected on seat users. We do have some more information on our privacy policy if you, on the link below, and there's a specific section on our approach to education within that policy. It's also worth noting we're also approved for use by the education framework as well. So as a thank you for attending our webinar and making it to the end, you are eligible to receive a free teacher license, and Christy will send you the link at the, after this, this webinar is wrapped up. Or clicking the button, we will then send you the slides for some step-by-step instructions. And are there any questions?
Hey, Marco, just a few. Can these seats also be used for clubs and other after-school activities?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, I just missed you there.
Oh, sorry. Can
Yeah.
these seats also be used for after-school activities in clubs?
Yes, as long as it's all part of the, as long as that after-school activity is part of the school, there's no reason why they can't.
Perfect. And then just for teachers who are looking to get themselves up to speed, would you recommend that they just go through the tutorials prior, or is there anything specifically just for the teachers?
There are some, yeah, there are some specific parts in the tutorial session which are catered to how to teach GameMaker, but I would highly recommend learning it yourself. And we have lots of great tutorials, even if it's just to learn the basics, like getting acquainted with a lot of the editors within the tool and some of the basics of the coding structures as well. So I would highly recommend that.
Awesome. Well, I think that's the end of the questions.
Cool.
So I just wanted to thank you so much, Marco, for your time, and thank you everyone for joining us. If you do have any questions, if you want more information, or if you want a quote, or just any other information that we can help you with, you can email info@studica.com. Again, I will be sending out that email that'll include the recording and the other links, so feel free to reach out to me as well if you have any other questions. But otherwise, thank you everyone and have a great day.